So everyone, I've got to start now because we're on a tight schedule. So John, Teresa, Nathan, Greg, I'll see you very shortly.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to start now, guys. Okay.
So we're going to disappear.
Yes, please, Greg. Yeah, I'll see you a bit later. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share. So you should only be able to see me up on screen. You might be able to see the others' names on there, but I'm going to get started. So zooming in now, we're looking at students' global skills. So I'm going to start really quickly by saying what these are. So we're talking life skills, life competencies, 21st century skills, etc., etc. They've got various names, but in essence, we're talking about things like creativity, intercultural awareness, global citizenship education, social emotional learning, digital competence, critical thinking. Basically, to wrap that up, they are the skills that students can develop, which will enable them to become fully rounded individuals by the time they finish school and continue on into their professional futures. So starting with the tips. Tip number 1 is be clear on what global skills are from the beginning. So investigate and be clear about what they are and their sub-skills by referencing course books that have global skills integrated into the syllabus, and provide answers to what the skills are and how to go about teaching them, very importantly. Existing global skills frameworks such as CASEL framework, you can have a look at that. That's CASEL framework. That will outline what global skills are and their sub-skills as well, so you can use that as a point of reference. But also don't forget that if you're teaching from a course which has global skills wrapped up into it, if you look at the teacher's edition, quite often, in fact almost always, the teacher's edition in the introduction will have quite a large bit of text, reading, advice, resource for you to develop your teaching skills in the area. But also, obviously, throughout the teacher's edition, you're going to have guidance throughout the unit as well on how to conduct those parts of the lesson as well. So don't forget to use the teacher's edition of the course. Tip number 2, don't reinvent the wheel. Choose a course, ideally, if you're in the position to, choose a course that has global skills and sub-skills integrated into the syllabus, integrated into the learning program. So Macmillan Education has many courses that already do this. You've got Global Stage, you've got Share It, Give Me 5, Academy Stars in primary. For secondary, you've got Gateway to the World, Great Thinkers, Skillful, sorry, not Skillful, Get Involved. And then for adult, you've got Skillful. So there are already plenty of courses out there that have these global skills wrapped up into the syllabus. So you don't need to write all of this material and write all these lessons plans yourself. A lot of the time is actually already there for you with step-by-step guidance, as I said, throughout the teacher's edition. Tip number 3, start small and then build your knowledge from there. So firstly, start by choosing 1 or 2 global skills. So for example, you've got intercultural awareness, digital competence, critical thinking, creativity, etc., etc. So just choose 1 or 2 of those and then follow that strand through the course book. Cherry pick those parts of the units to teach the students before moving on to another global skill, and then cherry pick from there. Also, after this session, as I said, you're going to be receiving the Guide to Teacher Development. In that guide, you'll find an entire section dedicated to teaching students global skills, as you will with all the other skills that you're hearing about today. And you can use that as a place to start when deciding on the particular skill or sub-skill that you'd like to explore in students' global skills. 4 minutes past. Okay, teaching. So tip number 4, explicitly teach the skills. Make the teaching and learning of global skills explicit by sharing them with your students. Really importantly, set clear but achievable teaching and learning objectives for you and your students. For example, the teaching objective, when you're looking at reading texts on popular sports in different countries, for example, the teaching objective could be expose students to a number of texts which explore what the most common sports are in X country or in XXX countries. Then compare those sports to the sports in your own country. See what they have in common. While the learning outcome for the skill could be understands how sports bring countries together, not apart, for example. Number 5, explicitly assess the global skills. So not only teach the skills, but assess them too. Again, start small, choose clear, explicit, and ideally practical assessment criteria, preferably from the course book if you're using a course book that teaches global skills, and communicate that to your students and make sure they know what is expected of them when you're exploring a particular skill or sub-skill. Students' expectations aren't only key to successful completion of a task, but they're also to their commitment and engagement in those tasks as well. Okay, tip number 6, lead by example. If you want your students to develop their global skills and sub-skills, we need to apply them. So we as teachers need to apply them and show ourselves to be applying them. So you can do this in all sorts of ways as a teacher. Students can see the things that you do and the way that you behave. So for example, you could make explicit your knowledge and experience in intercultural awareness when you're exploring a reading text on another culture, for example. Apply your knowledge and your use of technologies to the classroom. Be creative in your own way, in the way that you design and execute your classes, and be transparent about that. Make sure they know that you're being creative and that you're doing something quite different in the class. You've used your creative thinking skills. Something as simple as using different voices to tell a story, how you use timing to tell a story, how you use props to tell a story, and ways that you use to engage the students or encourage students to join in with telling a story. Be as transparent as you can when you are practicing and exercising these skills for yourself. Number 7, include a digital how-to focus. So I'm treading on the toes of John a little bit here by talking about digital. Hopefully not too much. I don't think it's talking about his tips, but always try to include digital competence through the choice of media. You can use, we've got Padlet, Mentimeter, you've got Zoom breakout rooms, Miro boards, Google Classroom when developing global skills, rather than seeing it as something separate. Digital competence is very much a global skill and needs to be taught to our students. Often we assume, especially with younger students, that they are all digital natives, but actually they're not actually very versed in how to use these various media for learning purposes. In this case, language and non-language skills. By doing this, we're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Not only are we developing students' digital skills or language skills, but also their global skills by making them used to using a variety of different digital media. Tip number 8, have a values focus on digital. So making sure that they are aware of a new term, I think, is netiquette, or online behavior and online ethics when they are conducting themselves online. You can do this by discussions on to decide if something's credible, by looking at a fake news article, for example. You'll notice that a lot of courses like Gateway to the World and Skillful have already got texts that explicitly focus on fake news and online behavior. On a side note, you can often keep a record of the chat box from the lesson, so you could use this to explore the etiquette used by students in the previous lesson. You can use that as a text, as a basis to explore etiquette in the online teaching and learning environments. Tip number 9, I've got 1 minute. So tip number 9, share your ideas. If you find something that works in your lesson, don't keep it to yourself. Make sure that other teachers in your school, in your local community, in your global community are aware of what worked and what didn't work. It's really important to share that with each other and make sure that you are not only building a bank of activities for yourself, but sharing with other teachers what worked in creating a safe learning environment for your students. What this also does, actually, by having this conversation, by instigating this conversation, is creating a safe space, a safe environment to voice your concerns about teaching global skills. You might not be on your own if you struggle. Finally, number 10, learn from others. So to be able to do everything we've just spoken about, to use all of the tools that are available, make sure to seek out advice from colleagues. As I said earlier, sharing isn't just an active activity, it's a passive activity. Make sure to learn from people that are also trying things like this. So what I would say is, if you're going to use something new in class, start with something before branching out. But as soon as you have started something, you've got a point of reference to start discussing with your teachers. Find out what they're doing. Perhaps your school has already assigned someone that actually organizes these sort of situations where you can share ideas. Reach out to them and get yourself involved with them. Most importantly, share ideas. Give and take any ideas that have worked and haven't worked, and start building on that bank of help. I think that's me done. I'm going to breathe for a second.
Very good. 10 minutes, well done.
Thanks, got there. Cheers, Nathan.
Do you want to put the tips up on the
screen? I will. I'm just going to share my screen
We
again.
We can give them a minute, I think. I mean, on my notepad, the word I wrote down was explicit. I think that really came out. I think, yeah, like you're saying, try and not to assume that students are just going to get it because it's part of what we're doing as an activity. You've got to make it explicit, track it through. That's what I got.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think making it clear to them what you're doing and what you're developing. Also, if you feel you have the relationship or the time to actually explore why these skills are being explored in classroom as well, it's important they know that this is to help them with their future and with their present, of course, but just to help them become those rounded individuals that they can all be.
Yeah.
Very cheesy, but yeah.
Someone wrote, I'm interpreting the question because it was a very short question, but about teaching the skills. Do you think that they should be taught separately from like, the vocab and grammar and the skills, or do you think it should be integrated together?
I think it can be both. I think it needs to be both. For me, the most part, it would need to be integrated. So if you are exploring a particular realm of vocabulary, lexical resource of some kind, then it would make sense to wrap that up in a critical thinking exercise, for example, debating on a particular point where you're able to practice that vocabulary. I think they're intertwined. Life skills are something, in my opinion, which are really ideal for exploring in the English language learning classroom, because we're learning language, learning grammar and vocabulary, but we need environments and topics to discuss when we're exploring and practicing using that vocabulary. So what better thing to do than exploring global skills at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Should we give them 30 seconds to read, or do you have, sorry, you want to say something?
No, Nathan, I think that's a good idea. Shall we just give them 30 seconds, everyone? We're just going to take a couple of minutes just for you to take a look at those tips. And if you've got any other questions, please put them in the chat box and we'll do what we can to answer them. Okay. Should we just go 2 minutes early, Nathan? Should we just get going?
Well, mine will probably be 2 minutes over, so yeah, I guess that would be an advantage.
All right, have a great session, Nathan. See everyone later.
Okay, great. It's just going to be me on screen, I think. Can everybody hear me? Hopefully you can. Okay, a warm welcome to everyone joining us today for this wonderful Fast Forward event. For the next 10-minute session, I'm going to be giving my top 10 tips for advancing inclusivity. Now, I think it's fair to say that many, if not most, students will face some kind of difficulty at some point during their learning journey. And while some students will overcome these difficulties, for many, they often persist into adulthood, and they can affect us in deeper ways than we might imagine. So think about who you are and how you got to where you are now. What kinds of challenges have you faced along the way? In what situations have you felt welcome and included? And when have you felt marginalized and excluded? I think teachers, no matter where they are in the world, are now engaging with a more diverse set of students, families, and teaching situations, as we've seen more recently. But I think we need to ask ourselves, are we recognizing and celebrating this diversity? Are we embracing it? Or do we sometimes avoid that diversity? So ask yourself the question, what is unique about my learners? We're all different. We all bring something unique to the classroom. But what is unique about my learners, and what positive aspects could that uniqueness bring to the classroom experiences of the student and of others? When it comes to diversity, though, I think we need to really challenge ourselves, to push ourselves even further. I think we need to ask, do students feel that the classroom is a safe space, a safe place where their experiences can be shared? And part of this is, how do they see themselves in relation to your content? So take a critical approach to things like exposure, portrayal, representation. And there's a lot of great work that's being done in this area. For those of you who know Global Stage, for example, will see this kind of approach in action, but I still think it has a long way to go in the classroom. So keep asking, am I exposing students to content, stories, media that embraces a range of abilities or cultural backgrounds or family circumstances? Tip number 2 is promoting an ethos of inclusion. So asking ourselves, is education equitable as well as equal? Now, there, as I've mentioned, been a lot of challenges recently, but as Laura Patsko said in her webinar recently, if we want to build back better, we need to build back fairer. And this involves adopting and promoting a broader definition of inclusivity, I think. Beyond just making sure that students are present and involved, beyond just providing additional support for students who might be weaker or have special educational needs and disabilities, and aspiring towards this ethos of inclusion, making it a shared ambition, not one person's responsibility, but having all stakeholders working together. And I would say, don't wait for others to make that happen. You can lead that process in your teaching context too. And I would also say, don't exclude students from that process. Bring their voices in. That's really important as well. If we truly want to understand what makes a positive school experience for students, we need to ask them and involve them. And I think by having this inclusive growth mindset and working together to create more inclusive learning environments, we can start to develop more student-centered approaches to teaching and learning. Which leads me on to tip number 3, which is focusing on strengths, interests, and passions rather than difficulties. And I think a lot of the current systems and structures in education often focus heavily on what students cannot do. And testing and curriculums obviously play a key role in that. This idea that there are corrects and incorrects, and the more corrects we are getting, the better we're doing. But I think we need to also accept that learning isn't a linear process, and it often isn't explicit. Students aren't learning what we think they're learning at the time we think they're learning it. We internalize new information by relating it to what we already know and do. So it makes sense to me to start from and link learning to what is already known. Learning can also often be detached from what is important to students. So find as many opportunities as you can to bring their interests and passions into their learning, as this can be more motivating for students as well. I think it's our responsibility to our students to identify and challenge any and all barriers to learning that might exist or even come to be in our teaching and learning environments. These barriers fall into several dimensions. It could be the content, it could be the environment, it could be our methods, it could even be the way we assess students. We don't have a lot of time here, but if you want to know more about this, I would definitely recommend our Advancing Learning blog post by my colleague, Alejandra Ottolina, who's presenting this later this afternoon. But on top of that, I think we also need to recognize that attitudes towards ability are already a barrier to learning for many students, especially those with disabilities, who can often report being seen as incompetent in ways in which they're actually not. So for example, students who have a physical impairment and use a wheelchair often report as being seen as cognitively impaired as well. And because of this, they are not given the opportunities to participate in the same way that their able-bodied peers may be. And I think this could be true for other students as well. Tip number 5 is start with small, realistic changes. Now, one of the questions around inclusion that teachers usually have is, how can we possibly ensure inclusion for all of these students with their diverse needs and individual circumstances and barriers to learning? And developing inclusivity can feel overwhelming or like even more work. But I would say, don't be so hard on yourself. We're only human. Teachers are superheroes, but we're not superhuman. We cannot just go back on Monday morning and change everything at once. So start with small, realistic changes. We often think inclusion requires some great act of intervention or support. But in fact, it's often the tiny details that really make a difference to students. Reducing glare, noise, or distractions, removing clutter, providing pencil grips. thinking about the color of the paper that we print on, or the choice and size of font that we're using. All of these things can make a difference to the perception your learners have about you, your teaching, and their learning. And students' perceptions of education really matter. Remember, you don't need plentiful resources, but rather a mindset that's open to change. Another practical thing you can do is seek out opportunities for more differentiation. So I would say, forget about learning styles and learning preferences. We're more likely to understand, interpret, internalize, and be prepared to use new information if we're exposed to it in a variety of ways, given plenty of opportunities to relate it to existing knowledge, and use it in a variety of meaningful situations. And the key here is variety. So use everything at your disposal: print, audio, media, songs, music, graphic organizers, dance, games, puzzles, role-playing, modeling clay, technology. Think about the potential of something like virtual reality, putting a headset on and being immersed into a situation. Task-based learning, problem-solving, communication, all coming together. Now, of course, we may not all have access to VR headsets, but I think the core takeaway from that is moving students from passive to active learning. As Nick Bear said in his webinar, students often do better when they're using their hands. Tip number 7 is making a difference through noticing and recording. So challenge yourself. Continuously reflect upon what is happening in your teaching context through a process of noticing and recording. And obviously, this is a continuous process, and we can use action research, even if it's small scale. It could just be one side of A4, but using that to inform change. And not just facts and figures. Education loves facts and figures, but also more qualitative data as well. For example, recording classroom narratives and reflecting upon them. Now, of course, all of this stuff, I've said a lot, but it all sounds probably very time consuming, and time is a teacher's greatest obstacle. So how do we buy more time? How do we buy more learning time? So tip number 8 is to embrace the benefits of a flipped classroom approach and the benefits that that can bring for students, especially who face difficulties in their learning. First and foremost, it can allow students more time and flexibility in terms of how they access and interact with our content. It's also less pressure on them, and there's nothing more demotivating, I think, than being asked to stand up in front of other people and do something that you don't understand. A flipped approach also helps us to connect with the home environment, and we know that students often do better when home and school communicate and work together. Now, of course, if we can make this happen, if we can pull this off, it also allows us as teachers more time in the class for interactive, communicative, and collaborative activities, such as projects. And I know we're going to be doing a lot of stuff around project work in the upcoming back to school activities, so look out for them. And I love projects are great because they allow students to choose how to show their learning and not just what they've learned. So this gives students opportunities for more choice. So we're going beyond giving them options, and we're giving them real choice. Options are, would you like an apple or an orange? Choice is, here's a plot of land, what would you like to grow and how would you like to do that? Yeah, so it's a change in mindset. Number 9 is empowering for change through choice and voice. So I think if we go right down to the roots of exclusion, discrimination, marginalization, we find power. And I've mentioned both voice and choice already, but I think real change comes from including and empowering those who are negatively affected by power dynamics, both by bringing in the voices of those who are excluded and marginalized, but also involving students in decisions that affect them. And I think if we do this, we really can create safe spaces and opportunities that empower students to co-create change in the places where they learn. Tip number 10, we've come full circle, and I hope these tips have highlighted the benefits of a need for more humanistic approaches to teaching and learning around inclusivity, a focus on who people are rather than just what they can or cannot do. And this comes down to relationships. And we know that the more healthy relationships a child has, the more likely they are to thrive. And good teachers do build good relationships with their students. But for me, great teachers humanize students. They have the ability to foster and develop relationships and connections between students, and then mediate this towards positive outcomes and social attitudes. So that's my top 10 tips. I don't know how I did for time in the end. It probably came up on screen. If you want to know more, I would definitely say go to the Advancing Inclusive section on the Macmillan English website, And of course, check out the handbook that you'll be getting very soon after this event. And Greg is there. Hi, Greg.
Thank you very, very much, Nathan. I really feel humbled because, I mean, what you've managed to pack in those 10 minutes or so really sort of is the sort of almost the essence, it feels like, of what a wonderful, modern, conscientious, careful, mindful teacher could be. And it's really heartwarming, that all of this is sort of in a sense available. My quick question, if I may, is with distance learning, online learning, do you feel that we have more potential for inclusive or less potential for inclusive now?
I think it could go either way, but there's definitely potential for it to be more inclusive, because as we move kind of back to what people would consider normal before, we now have more opportunities, I think, to use a variety of methods. So, if we think about students with, let's say, autism, for example, they may have thrived in this past year because it detaches that
right.
That face-to-face. So I think it's giving us more to think about and more opportunities to be inclusive, certainly.
Okay.
But I think it's down to the teacher. For me, it's about being proactive, I think, rather than reactive. Having that inclusivity at the center of what we do and thinking, will these things benefit, or will this approach benefit all students? Not just is it a reactive change to someone who's struggling. I think that's the change in mindset.
I mean, a lot of what you've said will link seamlessly with what I am about to say about assessment for learning, because of course, how can you assess for learning rather than simply, do the traditional assessment of learning if you are not explicit about what your objectives are, if you do not engage and involve everybody as much as you possibly can, etc., etc. So congratulations, Will, and the organizers of this wonderful event for sequencing it like that, because I think there's an obvious link there.
Really, yeah.
And you're getting lots and lots of thank yous, as you can see in the chat. So well deserved. Okay, so shall we push on, do you think? Since we also seem to be 2 minutes ahead of time, do you think I should start?
Yeah, if you want to, yeah. I will close down my camera. Thank you to everyone, and I will see you all at the end. And good luck, Greg.
Thanks very much, Nathan. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so on to session number 3, ladies and gentlemen. And I hope you recall that my topic is assessment as learning. I hope I do not really have to go into a huge amount of detail when it comes to the concept itself. What I would rather do is go over the tips and then perhaps have some sort of follow-up discussion at the end. So my tip number 1 is that objectives need to go before the task. And it sounds very obvious at one level, but perhaps it isn't so obvious at another, as Malcolm Mann and Steve Taylor-Knowles emphasized in their wonderful webinar. It is absolutely essential that students understand what is required of them before attempting a task, particularly a productive one. And they deserve to know what are the success criteria and how much each of them will count. In other words, what it is that we will be really looking at when assessment comes in. For example, when doing a speaking task, are they to concentrate on getting their message across and not worry about any mistakes that they might make along the way? Or on the contrary, should they focus on being as precise and accurate as possible? Important, such criteria should be given in a language that students actually can understand. So with lower levels, if you know their mother tongue, perhaps it's a good idea to do it in their mother tongue. What is more, there is good argument that task success criteria could be discussed and even negotiated with the class to increase a sense of say and ownership and thus maximize student engagement. My tip number 2 is that we need to model desired outcomes. And it again seems relatively straightforward. We should use examples and models, because when students have a model of what they are to do, the tasks become naturally easier since they have a guide to follow. This is absolutely crucial with productive tasks, speaking and writing, but equally important with so-called passive ones. With writing, all we need to do really is direct students to sample answers, step-by-step guides, and other such forms of help that good modern course books offer these days. With speaking, it's great if you provide them with a good model yourself, for instance, by telling a story or role-playing a conversation with one of the students before everyone else does in the class. By the way, it's one great use of teacher talking time in the classroom. Tip number 3 is really something that I feel very strongly about. It's about feedback and feed forward. There is wide agreement these days that good quality supportive feedback is one of the most important things that a student can get from that teacher. But let's not just tell them what they've done wrong. Let's take time to highlight the things that we like, because this will build our relationship with the student long term. And most importantly, let's encourage them to produce a second attempt using the information on the first one that we've provided. And this is what this notion of feed forward stands for. Not so much feed back, but feed forward. What matters is the next, hopefully more successful attempt. Super important, if only possible, why not grade that draft one, and instead wait until they've made some sort of use of the comments that we've provided, and that will be indeed a case of feed forward. Tip number 4 is about goals. My goals versus students' goals, because as language professionals, we all know that what we need to achieve, what the requirements are, it is part of our professional repertoire. But this won't do as much good as it could if students don't understand why we do the things that we do. So let's talk about our goals with them and perhaps work out common ones, for instance, by negotiating a class contract for a semester or a year. And apart from this, each and every student could and really should have their own personal learning goals. And to do this, they need to be able to identify both their strengths and what they need to work on. In other words, they need to learn or be taught, or both, how to self-assess. I'll go back to self-assessment in a moment. Tip number 5 is about task selection. I don't think I need to convince you that if you do assess students, you should assess what you've taught. So the types of tasks that you choose and the proportions of these matter a great deal. If only possible, use tasks to help students learn and demonstrate their understanding of specific language points or skill areas. Conversely, avoid monotonous, routine, superficial tasks where students' activity is restricted and a significant amount is left to pure chance and guessing. In general, the greater the amount of language processing that the student needs to do, the better. And this does not necessarily mean that students need to produce extended answers and, then you need to check them in your private time. Micro-production is key. What do I mean by this? Transformations, partial translation, grammaticalization, and other deep processing tasks with language. Tip number 6 is about keeping track of students' learning. Again, we all know that learning increases when students reflect on what they've learned and share their knowledge and their achievements with you and with other students. How can this be done? Well, to me and Kia, who gave a wonderful webinar on this, that's where the idea of learning portfolios comes in really handy. All it takes is a durable folder where a student can store selected writing assignments. Or these days, as Russell Stannard has taught us in his wonderful webinar, an e-portfolio where you can store writing pieces, obviously, but also recordings of spoken assignments. What's the point of such a portfolio? Well, to use them during periodic, reflective, stock-taking sessions where students go over their past pieces and reflect on the progress they've made. They could even attempt to instantly improve on an earlier task, correct their own errors, which they are now able to see. And, you know, it's easy to imagine what a wonderful motivator this is going to be. There's also good research that supports the idea of repeating the same tasks after a period of time. Again, to give a student an opportunity to see and hear for himself or herself how much easier it is now to do a communicative activity or draft an email message. Tip number 7 is getting them to reflect on the lesson. Ask students to reflect. Take the last 5 minutes or so of the class to ask them what they've actually learned. You can perhaps use an exit ticket to make it more dynamic and enjoyable. Start with something positive. For instance, by asking students to write one thing that they've learned today, a new word, a new structure, anything that they want, and put it on a post-it note. I'll give you one example of something really creative. Take a smile if you've liked the lesson today. Gradually get them to be even more open and possibly more critical, and use several colors of post-it notes to communicate to you something that they've learned, maybe with green or pink, but also something they're still iffy about with yellow or orange, and perhaps something they are still not sure about at all, they don't understand, they have trouble doing, and then perhaps could be color red. Especially the last one will only work if you build a relationship of trust with your learners first. Tip number 8 is about being creative with the test format itself. There are many ways other than a traditional test to find out what and how much your students have learned, and students have the right to show their knowledge in many different ways. Karolina Kotorowicz, who gave a wonderful webinar on that, gives one a great technique, which is writing a test for another student or another pair of students based on a template, a model, and explained if the student's mother tongue if needed. Tip number 9 is that assessment is not necessarily always your job. It can and perhaps should be done equally by other students, peer assessment, and the students themselves. That's self-assessment. And arguably, these alternative ways will prove more effective over time, provided, again, we take the time to involve the students in the process. And last but not least, tip number 10, which is promoting learning beliefs and self-esteem. Those are essential. Students need to know that what they are doing is actually worthwhile. Therefore, make sure that assessment and feedback activate students' motivation to learn successfully. And that's all that I wanted to say. I can see John, which means that I haven't run much over time. Could we have the 10 tips on a slide now? So, you know, being a proper teacher now, we can process those tips again. And if you've liked the session, perhaps.
I'm taking a smile. I'm taking a
thank you very
smile,
much.
Greg.
I hope you like it.
Yeah, I mean, there was so much wonderful information. I think I have to go back and watch that again actually and refresh, because there's so many great things. And I love the feeding forward. I love the e-portfolio ideas. And I think, like you said, for Nathan, I think your session is going to transition. There's a lot of crossover now with digital teaching as well. And a lot of teachers will have that issue with, how do I do assessment when I'm teaching online? And
Right.
I think you've shown that, you know, it's possible through things like the e-portfolios. I think the one issue which I'll come on to a bit later and I'd love to get your opinion on is that kind of building a trust as well when you're in that kind of online environment. when you can't see your students and you can't observe them. Often when you assess students, you can like see them in groups, you can see what they're doing and how they're acting. You know who's got it, you know who hasn't got it, and you can go to them. But online it's different, isn't it? And it's a bit more tricky, isn't it?
Well, it is tricky, but also I think, when one reads through colleagues' discussions in various online groups, at least for me, one thing that strikes me is that in some cases, at least, we sort of pick the wrong battles, and we concentrate too much on securing reliability, rather than building the rock bottom relationship with the students first, which is long-term going to be the foundation for everything else we do. So that's one thing. And the second thing is that a lot of the success of online assessment, crucially, in my mind, depends on the types of tasks that we choose. If we go for the wrong ones, particularly the monotonous, routine, closed tasks, then in a sense, it's really obvious that students will collaborate. That's 21st century skills. They are smart, so they will collaborate and they will make their job easier. Why should we be so afraid of that? Why should we lament this if for the past several years, we've all been talking about nothing else but 21st century skills? Well, there you have it. Now they can deploy those skills. So being smart about assessment in this sort of situation is, again, picking the battle right, going for tasks which require students' personal intervention, writing those tests for other students where you can't cheat because it's your own test. So, but I could go on and on about it, but there are other wonderful topics here, including yours, and I can't wait for how you're going to now mesh it with promoting digital skills.
Yeah.
So
yeah, thank you. There was one question which sort of stood out for me as well in terms of explaining tasks, and particularly for low-level students, and maybe where the teacher doesn't speak the same mother tongue as the students. And I'm trying to think of online. I think maybe I can give some tips in a minute as well about how you give instructions and explain tasks when it's super low level students as well. It's quite
that I
tricky.
think merits a session, actually. I hope Will is taking notes, because I think that would be a wonderful opportunity to really kind of put our heads together and think about cross-linguistic situations where it's a case of mediation, isn't it, too? How do we mediate instruction so that it is accessible to very low levels if you do not share their mother tongue?
Yeah. A lot of people loved your exit ticket idea as well. They asked, any other ideas or techniques when doing online lessons, exit tickets? You gave a couple of ideas. I think little surveys, little quizzes at the end of the class tend to work quite well. I'll mention that as well, actually. So maybe we leave that one there, and I can mention a little bit about that in a minute as well. And the other one was last one. Could you suggest websites where we can create students' portfolios?
Well, actually, thanks for raising that, because actually you don't need any special websites. All you need is your basic Google suite. You just go into Google, and in your selection of apps that you have got with your Google account, you have a very, very straightforward way to create a very a primitive website. And honestly, I did this, which means that anybody can do it. And you just create, it takes 2 minutes, really, just a couple of clicks. And that website becomes that minimal virtual folder where a student can, again, minimally personalize it with their picture, their name, and then they revisit such a folder every week or every, at the end of every unit of work, and they supply the piece which, for instance, they are particularly proud of. Okay, and then over time they build a collection of pieces which they can revisit and do the things that I talked about. Also, something that I know that I went very fast, but it's very, very interesting to rather than searching for new tasks all the time, revisit certain types of tasks after a period of time. And again, show students quite physically that the very same, say, speaking activity, such as a mini presentation, or whatever, or a writing activity, such as writing an email on a particular topic, will have improved, because they are doing it again, having worked with you, a wonderful teacher, for the past several months, and that's a great motivator, really.
Nice.
I mean,
Okay.
that's magic.
Brilliant. All right, Greg. Well, thank you so much. And
Thank you.
Go and rest your voice. And
All right,
I
I'll
will
disappear.
I will take over from here. So thanks very much from Greg. A lot of overlap now moving into this next session. We're going to be having a look at advancing digital teaching skills. So 10 tips coming your way. Probably one of the biggest areas over the last 1 or 2 years for us, that transition from face-to-face teaching to online teaching, a huge shift in the way that we deliver our classrooms, a challenge for our skill set, but let's have a look in a positive way. We're learning new skills, we're getting out of our comfort zone, and we are upskilling ourselves constantly, aren't we, over the past few months or years. If you're like me, I started with very, very limited digital skills. I probably still have very, very limited digital teaching skills, but bit by bit, I'm improving my skills, okay? And hopefully that'll be the same for you. Some of you may be digital teaching whiz kids by now, but I got some tips for you, digital whiz kids, a bit later. So let's start then with number 10, a little bit of a countdown. So at 10, I would say with face-to-face teaching and online teaching, there are so many crossovers, and where you can, think about how you can just adapt or tweak what you would do in a face-to-face class to the online context. So, for example, plan a mix of plenary-based and small group work or pair work type activities as you would in a face-to-face classroom, to keep lessons interesting, keep students motivated, keep the activity types varied as well. Many of you will be using platforms like Zoom with breakout rooms. I'm sure a bit of trial and error, and I'm sure some breakout rooms were disasters at the start, right? And but keep going, and keep training your students in the way of communication in breakout rooms and other communication tools, messaging apps, for example, for pair work and small group work. Number 9, so at 9, set up students for success. So as a language learner, I'm learning Chinese, or trying to learn Chinese out here in Shanghai in China. And I think I'm motivated when I have a sense of self-efficacy. So what I mean by that is like a feeling that I know what I'm doing and that I can succeed. So we need to maybe train our students, give them everything they need to feel confident, to help them understand what they're doing, so they're more likely to be able to achieve and succeed in the task. Importantly, with this is trying to find, as Greg said, with the tasks, talking about the tasks, finding the right task. With that, finding the right level of challenge as well is also incredibly important with online learning. As Nathan mentioned as well, with inclusivity, different levels or different types of students as well, that's even more important, having sort of graded activities at different levels, so it's not too challenging or not too easy, so that they get demotivated. Where you can, model strategies to help your students and show them exactly how to use digital tools or practice apps or digital platforms to help them succeed. At 8, we have don't forget the social presence. It's very difficult, isn't it, with online classes? With face-to-face, you've got your students in front of you, you can see them, you've got all the eye contact. With online teaching, it's a little bit more tricky. But as Greg mentioned, building or trying to build that environment of trust, open communication, and group cohesion is even more important with online classes. help students to try and project their personalities in the online environment. We can do this through, for example, having students engage in small talk at the start of class, at break times, at the end, have students post and respond to introductions about themselves and other group members, maybe on a group forum or a shared board, share their work, get other students to comment, give feedback, try and create nice sort of dynamics in that online classroom, and try and create that sense of group identity. Things like birthdays, celebrating successes, celebrating group achievements can go a long way to help building that group cohesion and trust. Talking about trust, number 7, trust in your teaching skills. Yes, we all see technologies, right, that we want to use with our students, but maybe your subject matter expertise and your pedagogical expertise are often far more important in the eyes of students than your technology skills. Maybe worry less about using too much fancy technology, okay? But just make sure that technology that you use serves your specific pedagogical purpose. Okay, you can gradually find new ways or different ways of using technology, keep learning and keep integrating those into your classroom, but just find those that suit your purpose or your language learning purpose. Okay. At number 6, we're talking about flipped classroom approaches. So where you can, see if you can flip the learning. So at home, they can be doing more of the receptive work. And then when they come to class, they can apply that learning in more communicative type activities, maybe using breakout rooms or sharing their learning in the class. But most importantly, with the flipped classroom, make sure there's a connection between what they're doing outside of the class and what they're doing in the class. Make sure there is a connection there, okay? Moving on now to number 5, a favorite one of mine, plan transitions and practice the use of multimodal technology. So I'm sure we've all been in a case where you are trying to get a video working, you're trying to get your audio working when you're teaching online, and it's taking time and you're faffing about and your students are losing interest and they're thinking, oh my word, what is this teacher doing? So try and avoid those long, embarrassing pauses when you're trying to fiddle around with the technology, okay? Try and practice the transitions of moving from your platform, maybe to a video and then back to your PowerPoint. Practice these transitions before your class. Maybe try with a colleague, a friend, or a family member first, and that will save you lots of embarrassment, okay? At number 4, platforms. So yeah, utilizing a digital or online platform to help you manage the whole process. Russell Stannard, who is one of our ACE teacher trainers, yeah, he talks about the live online lesson is only half of the story. What goes on behind the scenes, sending homework, marking homework, managing this process, helping students access audios and videos outside of the classroom, revising the lesson. If this all can come in one nice kind of digital platform, that's going to help you a lot. And this will help you manage the big picture once the live class is over. Okay. At number 3, Greg mentioned this already, collect data as you go for formative assessment. What works, what doesn't work, and then you can adapt your teaching. Small quizzes, ask your students about the lesson, have individual chats at the start when you're waiting for other students to arrive, or at the end, have surveys. can-do statements at the start of a lesson, at the start of the unit. You can then use these to inform your teaching moving forward, and you can adapt your teaching accordingly. At number 2, well-being and mindfulness. A lot of us with online teaching, we're staring at the screen all day, and then we're going off and we're looking at our phones and marking our students' homework, and we're constantly looking at the screen. Try and stepping away now and again, practice some mindfulness techniques and breathing techniques, clear your mind between tasks before the lesson, and this will really help you, I think, with your teaching, and help pass on your knowledge of mindfulness as well to your students, and try and practice that in your classes as well. And finally, at number 1, keep developing your skills through continuous professional development. Whether you're a digital whiz kid or a beginner digital teacher, keep improving yourself, keep reading, watching, studying in small chunks, and apply your learning as soon as you can to see what works, see what doesn't work, and then you can go from there. And if you're an experienced teacher, don't get too complacent, because there will become a time maybe where you'll hit a peak and then you'll go crashing down. Okay, so try and predict that time when your students are going to lose motivation, get bored of your online teaching ideas, keep an eye out for new ideas, and even better, like today, find a community of teachers you can share your online teaching ideas with. Teresa, hello.
Hi, John. While we're looking over those 10 points again that you just mentioned so well, there's a question. Marwa has asked an important question that I think some of us have been plagued with over the last year and a half when we've been stuck online. And the question is, what do you do with students who don't want to open their cameras? Perhaps they're too shy, perhaps they don't want us to see where they are. Often many reasons. Do you have any ideas, any tips, John, about how we could encourage students to open cameras? Have you had this experience yourself at all? And what have you done about it?
Well, yeah, I'm thinking about the training context as well. When you have trainees and their cameras is off, and it's so hard to know whether they're listening and what they're doing. Yeah. I guess I would have certain, like in the face-to-face classroom, you have kind of online teaching rules, like a contract with your students as well. But I guess talking about inclusivity and going back to Nathan's as well, if there's a particular reason maybe why they don't turn on the camera, they're embarrassed about their home or where they live or something like that, then it's important to get to the bottom of that and find out the reason, and then work with the students to find a solution, isn't it? Because you can't go through a whole term and not be able to see someone. We talk a lot about trust and group cohesion and group dynamics, and it's so important to see people, hear people, isn't it? So yeah, trying to get to the bottom of it individually, maybe behind the scenes with that student, I would suggest, and find out the reason behind it.
Yep, absolutely. I know in some institutions it's optional. Where I work also, universities, okay, for example, make it optional, but I don't know, maybe there are activities that we can do which require their presence, and maybe by using various apps like Flipgrid or something like that, we can encourage them to start venturing out bit by bit, step by step.
Yeah,
and
I guess so.
open up their cameras. Yeah,
I guess so. And if it is optional, then you just have to look for other ways of trying to get their personalities across by, these shared boards or shared forums, and Padlet.com is a good one of sharing their work. So at least people sort of know who they are and they're posting work, and they can give them sort of comments and positive feedback and things to help them feel good at the same time as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, tricky, very good question, and a tricky one.
Absolutely. So I think you were saying teachers should use and model the new apps themselves, but shouldn't worry too much about being total experts. I think that's something I'm going to be summing up at the end, kind of a bit of what everybody said, but I think often our students can sometimes help us too. And that can also maybe give them another reason to maybe kind of turn on their camera if they have a role of perhaps helping us to put the app up, make sure it's working, and checking if everybody's online. So maybe take the focus off them as students demonstrating their English, and put the role of helper assistant with the app. And this might be another way of I don't know, diffusing that embarrassment and shyness that sometimes teens or adults may have.
Yeah, it sounds like a very good idea to me. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So
over to you.
Over to me. Absolutely.
All the best. Bring us home in style, Teresa.
Yes. It's coming home. It's coming home.
I'll see you later. I'll be back a bit later.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Good luck. See you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a lovely presentation. So mine is a kind of a wrap up at the end, because I'm talking about top 10 tips for advancing teaching skills in general. So tip number 1 is think about your own well-being first and your own motivation. So strive to motivate yourself through the activities or the videos or the stories, the films that you choose, so that you yourself feel motivated, because it's contagious, as you know. And look after your own well-being as well. And you can do this together with your students. So at the beginning of lessons, little bit of deep breathing. Remember, another thing which I learned from one of the webinars in this season was the 20-20-20 rule. So if you've been looking at a screen, or even if you're face-to-face in the classroom and you've been looking at the blackboard or looking at a text for 20 minutes, that's probably time to give your eyes, above all, but also your brain, a little break. So the second 20 is look away, look into the distance for about 20 meters away from you for 20 seconds. The 20-20-20 rule. After 20 minutes, look 20 meters into the distance for 20 seconds. Even that can be a great break, both for the teacher and for the students. The second tip is, as all of us have been mentioning, is upskilling ourselves to cope with change. One of the participants asked, are you still online? I think some of us are teaching online, some of us are teaching face-to-face, some of us are doing a hybrid. One thing that we've learned in these last 16 months or so is that change is with us and will continue to be with us. So every little bit helps. We hope that with the guide that we'll be sharing with you, you'll be able to go directly into any webinar that takes your fancy, that any area that you think you'd like to improve, and just take baby steps, one little activity at a time. And if it motivates you, it's bound to motivate your students too. Tip number 3, remember, we talked about, yes, we're teaching people, we're teaching the whole person. Carol Reed has talked a lot about the whole child, how when we're working with children, we should remember all the C's, the C wheel, as she calls it. So try to arouse their curiosity with a story, try to encourage their creativity by making something and sharing it, or by painting something and sharing it, or by changing a story in a particular way, and encourage them to feel they're part of a community. And this is not only true for children, it's also true for teenagers, teens, tweens, and adults too. Collaboration, working together in teams in a context that interests them, and doing activities that challenge them so that they can show what they can do, and even that challenges them to do things that they didn't know they could still do. And a great feeling at the end of that. We've learned also that in order to survive, both as teachers and as students, we need to encourage and develop a growth mindset. So if you sometimes catch your students saying, I can't do this, I'm no good at this, I'm hopeless at this, or even if you catch yourself saying, I'm not as good as this person or that person, I can't use this app or that app, add the word yet. I can't do this yet, or I don't know this yet, or I'm not as good as X yet. And that just opens up the way to always learning about different technologies, different cultures, different possibilities. Absolutely always open to different ideas, cultures, methodologies, and lifestyles. Tip number 5, always try to engage, to hook your learners, and if possible, get them to personalize. So when we're reading them a story, we could ask them, which character do you identify with? Who are you closest to? Who do you like? Who do you not like in the story? And get them to bring in something of themselves. And everybody loves to talk about themselves and what they think and how they feel. And I think this is one of the great ways of motivating all ages, is encouraging them to talk about themselves. If they see a picture, perhaps get them to think about, have you been in a place like this before? What does this picture remind you of personally? So the best way to motivate and engage very often is to get them to personalize, rather than just doing mechanical exercises which have nothing to do with their personal life at all. This is a time where we need to be connected with each other and to talk personal more than ever before. Tip number 6 is, as has been mentioned, offer choices so that students can feel a bit more autonomous. Autonomy is not an easy thing to get in our students immediately, but it's something that we can start to introduce by giving them a choice. You can read this story, or we can read this story, giving them a choice. You can do a project using PowerPoint, or you can use a poster. You can use high technology or no technology or low technology. Giving them choices from a very early age and then increasing will then help your learners feel a little bit more in control. And when they feel in control, you get a lot more cooperation and maybe a lot more cameras coming on if you're still teaching online. If they feel that they have a say, not only in the questions that you ask them, but also in how they do an activity, which activity they are going to do, in which order they're going to do it. This is very, very important. Tip number 7 is use those pictures. They're not just there in the course books to make the course books look beautiful. Each picture is full of possibility. And by using some of the visual thinking routines, which are great free source from the Project Zero, Harvard University, if you Google it, You can find lots and lots of questions that you can ask your students when they're looking at pictures. So they're not just talking about what they see, but also what does it make you think of? For example, what do you think this place looked like before? What do you think it will look like in the future? So we can be getting them to use all kinds of grammatical structures, all kinds of vocabulary structures, which are there in the syllabus, in the course book to be practiced, but using pictures and developing their visual literacy and critical thinking skills. And there is something in our guide that you can go to and follow up, which will help and suggest the kinds of questions that you can ask students. Tip number 8, life skills and global citizenship, which Will was talking about today. Preparing students for real life. It's not something that has to be part of the syllabus. It can be something that we can be using all the time, modeling and using. For example, accepting criticism. The way that we accept criticism is a life skill. For example, working in teams, for example, solving problems. All of these things are a life skill which we can be developing throughout the class, even when they're lining up to go to lunch, discussing what to do in a 5-minute break. All of these are life skills and global skills, and especially project work. That's going to give them a great opportunity to start doing little things to change the world. And wherever possible, whatever we do, try and make it cross-curricular. So if you're doing a story on Goldilocks and the 3 bears, talk about where bears live, geography, what colors they are, draw them, talk about their diet and their nutrition. Try to link everything you do with other subjects that are going on at the same time, which will reinforce and help students to remember and understand them better. And finally, what everybody said, has mentioned, variety, variety, variety. Our concentration spans have gone down, all ages, from little kids to adults. So include a lot of activities in your lesson plan. This will also help differentiate for different individuals. It'll help mixed ability classes have something for everybody. A bit of movement above all, a bit of visual and a bit of sound, whatever it may be. And there we have my summary.
Thank you so much
of the 10 points. Yeah.
Thank you
welcome.
very much. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Good stuff. Oh, that was brilliant, Teresa. Thank you so much. Massively valuable advice. Thanks so much for putting that all together.
You're very welcome.
So we've had a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
So the first one is it's crossover between teaching skills and assessment for the future, Greg's session earlier. How to increase students' engagement in teaching test preparation classes online? Any ideas about getting them more involved and engaged with the lesson when they're preparing for a test or an exam?
To be honest, I would say all the things that I mentioned before. Just because it's a test coming up, the content of the test is still going to involve global issues. It's still going to involve some element of them talking or thinking about themselves. Teachers can also approach these skills of reading, speaking, listening and writing with a variety of different sources, whether they're video or film. They can get students still brainstorming using applications like Flipgrid or Mirror or whatever it is. So all of those things really, the motivation, the engagement, the personalization, the autonomy perhaps. Greg mentioned them writing tests for each other, you know, getting them involved in this test skills. All of those still apply. There's no reason, just because it's preparation for a test, that it should be dry and boring. No reason at all.
Absolutely.
Bring it all in. Bring it all in.
Great. Thanks, Teresa. And just two more things, just a bit of clarification, because you spoke about a few things and people want to make sure they can make a note of it. So would you mind just going through really briefly the C-wheel techniques that you spoke about earlier from Carol Reed?
The C-wheel's it's not techniques, but it's something to keep in mind when you're teaching. It's the whole person, or the whole child, the whole teenager, the whole person. So the C-wheel, which if you look up C-wheel, you can find it online in color, not in black and white like mine, talks about the things that are very important that we make sure is happening in the class. So are the kids feeling part of a community? That's one of the C's. Are the kids using their creativity? That's another C. Are they feeling cared for, and are they caring for others? Are we arousing their curiosity? Are we giving them challenge? And these are all things that have been mentioned throughout all the webinars today. So these are all important things. Coherence, to make sure that they can understand what's happening, giving them a context to understand. Those are the C's that really should be kind of present in any lesson for any age when we talk about teaching the whole person.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Teresa. I think if it's okay with you, should we invite John, Greg and Nathan back on?
Yes, let's do that.
Let's get everyone back in to say thanks and hi. Hello, hello.
Hello again.
Thanks so much, guys. That was brilliant. Well, thanks to everybody here for putting on such a good set of sessions there. That was that really was a bullet train, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
It was.
Thanks
indeed.
for inviting us, Will.
Yeah. Thanks.
Oh, it was a no-brainer, John. Of course. Thanks very much for putting it together, guys. It's been great working with you on this and on the handbook, the guide to teacher development we're handing out on the emails after this. Thanks so much for your input on that and for putting together these sessions. It's been great.
Pleasure.
It's been great to be involved in this all together as a team with the whole team of teachers out there all over the world. It's a great feeling to be connected. A global team, yes, all working to the same outcomes. Good teaching.
It does feel very global, does it not?
Indeed.
Especially with us, we're all at different points in the world. We've got Turkey, it's Dubai, Nathan, right?
Right, yeah, I'm here.
Greg, you're in Warsaw, Poland?
Yes, indeed.
John, you're in Shanghai in China. That is truly global, and as well as all of the teachers that we've got attending this session. It's been wonderful, absolutely wonderful.